Pacific Northwest, a land of jagged, formidable mountains and glistening emerald forests. The rough edge of a continent, wrestling with the sea, resisting the tides with imposing stone sentinels. One of the last great American wilderness areas, tamed by civilization. And yet nature rises up to remind us of the awesome power of this wondrous land. Olympic National Park is one of the most diverse wilderness areas in America. Where a spellbinding alchemy of smooth sand and sharply chiseled rock contrasts with dense primeval forests, constantly moistened by rain and mist. Across Puget Sound to the southeast stands the great sleeping giant, Mount Rainier, and the national park that bears its name. Located in the western portion of the state of Washington, these two parks are the crown jewels of the Pacific Northwest. But despite their proximity, they offer remarkably different wilderness experiences. Mount Rainier is clearly the most impressive feature in the park. The mountain itself sits on more than 1/4 of the park's 368 square miles. On a clear day, Rainier's ethereal, otherworldly presence can be seen looming above the skyline of Seattle, some 60 miles away. In 1792, Captain George Vancouver of the British Royal Navy anchored his ship in Puget Sound and named the lofty mountain in honor of his friend, Rear Admiral Peter Rainier. At 14,411 feet, Rainier towers almost 8,000 feet above the other peaks of the Cascade Range and is the 5th highest mountain in the continental United States. Mount Rainier's massive, seemingly serene presence belies its real character. The mountain is actually a volcano, a volatile mixture of explosive heat and molten lava deep in the belly of the earth. The great irony of Mount Rainier is that its volcanic character is masked beneath a blanket of ice and snow. No fewer than 26 glaciers cling to the summit and slopes of the mountain, a river of ice that covers 35 square miles, the largest year-round mass of ice anywhere in the United States, except Alaska. In its imposing posture, with its lofty summit often obscured by clouds, Mount Rainier seems immutable and timeless, so it is all the more surprising that the mountain is a relative youngster in terms of geologic time. In fact, Mount Rainier was formed by volcanic activity that started only about 1 million years ago. The raw material for the mountain was created by a series of volcanic eruptions. Since then, this volcanic mass has been continually shaped and sculpted by glaciers, a process that continues today. Rainier is one link in a chain of volcanoes that dominates the Cascade Range. After the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, some 50 miles to the south, additional monitoring stations were installed on Mount Rainier to provide early warning of any change in underground activity. Although there have been no volcanic eruptions for almost 100 years, widespread geothermal activity attests to the power that still percolates beneath the mountain. The most visible power on the mountain, however, is the slow, inexorable march and retreat of the peak's massive glaciers. Glaciers are formed where the snowpack accumulates, and its sheer weight compresses the snow into dense ice. Park visitors are often surprised by the dark, dirty look of glaciers. Their sooty appearance is due to the residue from the rocks and boulders that glaciers quarry from the landscape as they move. In fact, glaciers derive much of their carving power from this material. As boulders are entombed in the glacier, they act as sharpened blades and oversized chisels that dislodge other abrasive material. This rock debris is eventually transported and deposited into ridges called moraines. Moraines are left behind after a glacier recedes. Like a footprint in wet cement, they are a kind of signature that marks the glacier's farthest advance. At its downhill terminus, where a glacier encounters warmer conditions, there is a protrusion called a snout. These snouts can reach heights of 80 feet or more, giving the glacier an almost haughty appearance. Another common glacial feature is called a crevasse, a deep fissure in the glacier's surface. These frightening, seemingly bottomless gashes in the ice are sobering reminders of the danger and uncertainties that these living rivers of ice can pose. Nisqually is one of the most accessible and intriguing glaciers in the park. This time-lapse sequence shows movements of the glacier over a period of a single summer. After retreating for more than a century, in the mid-1970s, Nisqually executed a remarkable turnabout that intrigued many experts. It reversed its direction and began to advance slowly. For the moment, it seems to have reached an equilibrium and come to a standstill. In Rainier, twin forces, volcanic heat and glacial cold, create yet another powerful phenomena. The volcanic fire inside the mountain constantly warms the fields of ice on the surface. This collision of opposites sometimes creates a natural event of staggering destructive potential. Jökulhlaups, an Icelandic term meaning glacial outburst flood, are flash floods that burst forth when the glaciers melt very rapidly. As waters race down the mountain, they become a devastating wave of ice, trees, mud, rocks, and boulders that can flatten anything in its path.
And we heard this roar. It sounded like a freight train, and we just bombed down the trail. We got right to the suspension bridges. The flow was coming down. It had started to go under the bridge already, and it wasn't wet. It was dry. It was mounds and mounds of like liquid dirt, but it wasn't, no moisture, just dust. And big boulders as big as a car, 8-10 feet around, floating right on top. And you can see the watermark like 60 feet up from the creek bed underneath the bridge. And it just overflowed the whole valley.
Jökulhlaups can travel downhill at speeds of 10 miles an hour or more and have been known to transport boulders the size of a small truck. Since the late 1960s, South Tahoma Glacier has been the source of a series of powerfully destructive Jökulhlaups. This former picnic area has been closed to visitors since July 1988, when it was engulfed by massive mud flows that extended more than 5 miles. But the awesome power of Rainier's complex geological forces is only one aspect of the park's grandeur and mystique. Below Rainier's imperial summit lie landscapes of breathtaking beauty, a profusion of flora and fauna, and a variety of sights, sounds, and experiences that make the entire park a national treasure. The lush forests of the lowlands are the tranquil domain of the western red cedar, western hemlock, and Douglas fir. These noble trees can grow more than 250 feet high. Varied shrubs, ferns, and mosses carpet the moist, shady forest floor. Not far from the rich lowland forests is Longmire, site of an old mineral springs resort. It is named for James Longmire, who helped to pioneer a route across the Cascades. He was one of the homesteaders among a wave of immigrants who made their way to western Washington in the latter part of the 19th century. This cabin, built by James Longmire's son, Elkane, in 1888, is the oldest man-made structure in the park. The road that leads from Longmire to the park's higher elevations was one of the first roads built in the national park. President William Howard Taft made the inaugural ride on it in 1911. Because the road was still rough and muddy, teams of horses were hidden along the way. They would emerge from the trees and pull the car over the worst spots, much to the amusement of the president. At elevations above 3,500 feet, the forests are noticeably less dense and the trees considerably smaller than in the lowlands. This change is the result of harsher conditions here: cold temperatures, strong winds, and a short growing season. The sound and visual delight of falling water is one of the great joys of Rainier. The elegant dance of water over rock is a constant reminder that Rainier is, after all, part of the mountain range of falling water, the Cascades. Perhaps the park's most spectacular cascade is Comet Falls, plunging 320 feet over solid rock terraces. East of Comet Falls is one of the most beautiful areas in the park, aptly called Paradise. Here, at more than 5,000 feet, stands of mountain hemlock and subalpine fir give way to spectacular alpine meadows. The breathtaking beauty of this landscape makes it the most visited area of the park. When Elkane Longmire's wife Martha arrived in 1885, she was so moved by the magnificent vistas that she said, "It looks just like paradise." No one disagreed, and the name stuck. By 1896, stagecoach runs were bringing more and more visitors to Paradise, as well as to other areas of Mount Rainier. The rapid influx sparked an effort to preserve this remarkable wilderness. Local newspapers, supported by scientific and conservation organizations, led a concerted lobby for the creation of a national park. On March 2nd, 1899, President William McKinley signed a bill that established Mount Rainier as the country's 5th national park. Today, Paradise has never looked better. Luminous hillsides of blue lupin, blushing fields of Indian paintbrush, And meadows awash in white Sitka valerian. But if summer in paradise is intoxicating to the senses, it's also tantalizingly brief. For most of the year, the park is blanketed with snow. Rainier's long winters make the park an ideal retreat for people interested in snowbound recreation. And with the help of a knowledgeable national park ranger, a winter in Rainier also affords a unique learning experience for young people.
Hi, welcome to Mount Rainier National Park. My name is Ron Warfield. I'm the Assistant Chief Park Naturalist here. I've been doing snowshoe walks now for almost 20 years. We're going to be looking at where snow comes from. In a school environment, students do not get a wilderness experience. So we bring the kids up here in groups to give them that wilderness experience that is fast becoming extinct in our culture, and try to give them the experience of nature in the environment under nature's terms, with the wind, with the rain, with the snow. You're standing in a place where the world record snowfall was set in the winter of 1971 and 72. Guess how many inches fell that winter? Any ideas?
93 feet.
93 feet. That's 1,122 inches. 93 feet would be deep enough if it was all sitting on the ground and not packed down to bury all of these trees that you see around us. Most of these trees are less than 100 feet tall. It's particularly important for this generation to be in the wilderness because this may be the last generation in which we have wilderness as we know it. So this next generation has the responsibility to save what's left. And it's our generation's responsibility to show them how to do that. Look at this. Remember I was telling you about the cone and the cone scales? All of these fit together like little kernels on a corn cob. Just, you would eat them off in spirals, if you're weird like I am. Well, that's the same way the wind blows those off, and then those little seeds blow out of there, and that becomes the food then for the ptarmigans and the snowshoe hares. Okay? Many of the kids are not used to using their physical abilities to the limit. They start out by throwing snowballs and running around. They're using their full capacity of their lungs and the full capacity of their legs to use that oxygen that their lungs are providing. We're at a higher altitude here too, of course, so that there's not as much oxygen as they're used to breathing. And by the time they're finished with the experience, they're exhausted. So that's an experience that most of them have not yet had, sitting in a classroom experience. Okay. Joy with the human beings is in sharing those wild, natural experiences. That, to me, is the real meaning of all of this, sharing that with people, but doing it in such a way that we don't destroy the very thing we've come to enjoy and try to understand.
When the long winter finally gives way to spring, Rainier's diverse wonders become more accessible to visitors. Like many of our national parks, Rainier offers an excellent trail system that encourages visitors to experience the wilderness environment up close. The heart of Mount Rainier's complex of trails is the Wonderland Trail, a 93-mile circuit around the base of Mount Rainier. Though Rainier is the most commanding feature of the park, there are other areas where the mountain's dominance recedes. One of these is Box Canyon, a narrow river gorge more than 100 feet deep and only 15 to 30 feet wide. And for musical entertainment, any number of songbirds will step forward to sing a solo. More than 140 species of birds have been identified at Mount Rainier. Personality types range from playful ravens to camp-robbing gray jays. Few campsite burglars dress more appropriately than the raccoon. These masked marauders usually hide near lakes or streams. For years, raccoons were thought to be fastidious eaters because of their habit of dipping food in water before eating. Other naturalists have speculated that raccoons lack salivary glands and wet their food in order to swallow it more easily. The park is also home to some of nature's most impressive predators. Cougars, also called mountain lions, feed primarily on deer and elk and live along the subalpine meadows and mountain ridges. A stealthy, secretive mammal, the cougar is rarely seen in the park. The bobcat is the most common wildcat in the United States. Not usually known for its prowess as a swimmer, this cat seems to manage quite well with the feline version of the dog paddle. In the southeastern section of the park, the Ohanapikosh Valley is renowned for the serene beauty and stately magnificence of its old-growth forests. Old growth refers to ecosystems dominated by indigenous large conifers at least 250 years old. Such forests are characterized by multi-layered vegetation and by a profusion of both standing live trees and fallen dead trees. Old-growth forests are fast becoming an endangered resource in this country. These towering giants in the grove of the patriarchs, hemlocks, Douglas firs, and cedars, are nearly 1,000 years old. The presence of such ancient and impressive trees inspires an appreciation of the timeless web of life in the wilderness. North of the old-growth forests is the scenic White River Valley. Geologists theorize that some 5,800 years ago, the summit of Mount Rainier collapsed, creating one of the largest known mud flows on Earth. The furious onslaught of mud and debris engulfed this placid valley and another 100 square miles of lowlands, all the way to Puget Sound. Just north of the White River Valley, Sunrise Point offers what many consider the most spectacular view of Mount Rainier in the park. Northeast of the mountain, the Sunrise area receives much less precipitation than other parts of the park. As a result, this alpine meadow is dominated by forms of vegetation that require less moisture, such as the whitebark pine. Sunrise also affords an excellent view of Emmons Glacier, the largest glacier in the continental United States. This enormous river of ice covers more than 4 square miles of the mountain's surface. It has been estimated that the glacier contains almost 24 billion cubic feet of ice. Perhaps the ultimate park experience in Rainier is a climb to the summit. For more than a century, the peak has beckoned to those who respond to the call of the wilderness. Today, the climb can be accomplished by almost anyone, provided he or she is in good physical condition and has a real taste for adventure.
Today we're going to cover an awful lot of things. One of the most important ones is probably how to use this ice axe. Everybody's been carrying it for the last half an hour or so to get out to the workout area.
For the inexperienced climber, the 2-day, 18-mile trek up and back down the mountain is preceded by a 1-day training course at the Paradise Climbing School. Here, experienced instructors familiarize students with basic climbing techniques.
The chances of falling this way are pretty slim, but should it occur, you want to know how to handle it. Look uphill, Erica. You want to plant that ice axe as far up the hill as you can and look at the head of the axe. Great, good job. Excellent stop. Basically what we're looking at today, folks, is about a 4 to 5 hour climb up to camp here.
The following morning, the group assembles to begin the ascent.
We've received a radio call from Camp Muir just about half an hour ago, and the weather report is winds are gusting 40 to 50 miles an hour at Camp Muir. The cloud layer is in at about 8,500 feet, so it looks like we're going to be in it for a while. Hopefully we'll punch through and be looking over the tops of these clouds. Okay, well, if we're all set, let's shoulder the packs and head on up.
As the climbers begin, they are following in the footsteps of some earlier adventurers. After several attempts on the summit in the 1850s and 60s fell short of the goal, the first successful climb was made by Hazard Stevens and Philemon Beecher Van Trump in 1870. They were led to the base of the peak by a Yakima Indian named Sluiskin, but he refused to continue the climb. He instead offered this warning.
Listen to me. Your plan to climb Tahoma is all foolishness. No one can do it and live.
Despite Sluiskin's dire prediction, Stevens and Van Trump pressed on to become the first to carve their names into history. The first day's climb ends at Camp Muir, which affords breathtaking views of other peaks in the Cascade Range to the south.
Peter, is that Adams over there?
That is correct. Yeah, that's Adams just poking above the clouds.
And where's St. Helens?
St. Helens is actually obscured. The cloud layer is a little bit high for us to get a look at Mount St. Helens.
The climbers make an early camp in preparation for their pre-dawn assault on the summit. Camp Muir has long been a way station for climbers of Mount Rainier. In 1890, schoolteacher and journalist Fay Fuller stayed here the night before she became the first woman to reach the summit. She later wrote of her experience.
Now I am satisfied. I accomplished what I have always dreamed of and feared impossible.
The final climb to the summit begins in the chilly pre-dawn hours. An early departure is needed to assure enough time to reach the top and still be able to complete the day-long descent. The last stretch of the climb is always the hardest. Bones and muscles ache, the air is thin, and each slow, arduous step requires maximum effort and concentration.
It
really tested me, a lot more than I expected. I had to dig down deep and look for something extra that I wasn't sure was there. But it was, and I feel great.
Taking on this kind of challenge really changes you. It's not really like anything else I've ever done. It's really hard and it's really incredible.
Even though we climbed as a group, I think this is a very personal experience. It's not so much between you and the mountain as it is between you and yourself.
After nearly 10,000 feet of climbing, through howling winds, bitter cold, and treacherous terrain, the climbers achieve the summit. They have met the challenge of the great mountain, and now the mountain gives its very special reward, a sunrise at the top of the world.
All right. All right.
Give another hug, Patrice.
Jeffrey, the old guys made it.
Those who climb Mount Rainier become part of an elite group of adventurers, people who have pushed themselves to the limit in order to experience nature in its pure, undisturbed state. John Muir, the father of the American conservation movement, was also a member of this elite group. After reaching Rainier's summit in 1888, he wrote,
"Of all the fire mountains, which, like beacons, once blazed along the Pacific coast, Mount Rainier is the noblest."
To the northwest, a mere 110 miles from Rainier's summit, lies the Olympic Peninsula. The last frontier of the great Pacific Northwest. Glacier-capped peaks, alpine meadows, boldly carved river valleys, lush virgin rainforests, and unspoiled ocean beaches teeming with marine life. A showcase for one of the greatest displays of natural diversity on Earth. Formidable and magnificent. With more than 900,000 acres spread across a peninsula of wonder, this is America's spectacular wilderness heritage, Olympic National Park. Within Olympic, there are 3 distinct and extraordinary landscapes, and each qualifies as a great national treasure. The Olympic Mountains, eternally snow-capped and punctuated by some 60 active glaciers. A rainforest as green and dense as an Amazon jungle. And a 57-mile stretch of beach that is as raw and wild as any in the country. Like Mount Rainier, the Olympic Mountains block moist air masses that blow in from the Pacific. As the air masses rise to cross the mountains, they cool rapidly, and the moisture they contain condenses into clouds, rain, and at higher elevations, snow. As a result, the western slopes of the Olympics receive as much as 145 inches of precipitation annually, more than any other place in the contiguous 48 states. Below the mountains, in the western-facing valleys of the Quinault, Keats, and Hoh rivers, lies a wondrous botanical treasure, the Olympic rainforest. The climatic conditions needed to create a temperate rainforest, a mild coastal climate, heavy summer fog, and a very generous rainfall are extremely rare. Outside of the Pacific Northwest, similar conditions are found only in southern Chile and in New Zealand. The Hall of Mosses Trail in the Hoh Rainforest offers an extraordinary glimpse into this lush universe of green. The rainforest is distinguished by stands of Sitka spruce and western hemlock. These trees grow larger here than they do anywhere else on Earth. Sitka spruce are joined by a host of other cone-bearing giants, including the massive western red cedar with its distinctively colored bark and pleasing aroma. Beneath this cathedral-like splendor, maples spread a lacy canopy. Due to the abundant moisture, these huge trees do not grow deep roots. Strong winds can topple them. Once a fallen tree begins to decay, it is called a nurse log. It supports seedlings that would otherwise have difficulty germinating on the fern and moss-covered forest floor. After the nurse log has decomposed, a row of mature trees remains, standing on stilt-like roots. The rainforest is typified by high concentrations of plants and by intense competition for space. Big leaf maples become upholstered, draped with club moss, licorice fern, and liverworts. A plant that grows on another plant but is not a parasite is called an epiphyte. They are not harmful to the tree unless too many crowd on a branch and their sheer weight breaks the limb. In the rainforest, more than 90 species of epiphytes grow in profusion. The lush greenery of the rainforest also attracts its share of wildlife. The Columbian black-tailed deer is the smallest type of North American mule deer. Although seemingly tame and approachable, when startled or frightened, the deer can strike severe blows with their sharp hooves. Black-tailed deer are vegetarians and feed on a wide variety of greenery. Because dense rainforests can make birdwatching difficult, the banks of creeks and rivers offer more open spots for observation. Harlequin duck, bald eagle, merganser, and kingfisher are among the species that may be seen. The great blue heron can often be seen wading in the waters of Olympic. This large, elegant bird remains motionless for long moments until its bill whips into the water, emerging with the catch of the day. River otters are common in the ocean and rivers of Olympic. Their playful antics belie the fact that they voraciously prey upon fish and other small animals. One of the most unforgettable sounds in Olympic is the piercing bugle of a 1,000-pound bull elk. Indeed, one of the proposed names for Olympic had been Elk National Park, since protection of the elk was one of the primary reasons for its creation. Today, the largest herd of wild Roosevelt elk in the nation lives in Olympic. These impressive elk were named in honor of President Theodore Roosevelt. Later, in 1909, he designated the area a national monument. The Hoe still looks much as it did to the early pioneers who came to farm this river valley at the turn of the century. One of the most famous early settlers was John Hulsdonk, whose wilderness skills and feats of strength have become legendary. Marilyn Lewis is the granddaughter of the pioneer who became known as the Iron Man of the Hoe.
My grandfather and his brother Henry left Iowa in 1890 and came to the valley to settle, looking for a home in the wilderness. The government was giving land to settlers to settle. You had to clear an acre and establish a roofed cabin with a well. My grandfather did what the government asked.
According to legend, the supplies John couldn't bring into his homestead by canoe he carried on his back. One such item was a cast iron stove. When asked if it was too heavy, he is said to have replied,
Only when the sack of flour in the oven shifts around.
After John established his homestead, he went back to Iowa and married his childhood sweetheart. Dora Hulsdonk, seen here in early family home movies, was every bit as remarkable as her famous husband. She gave birth to 4 daughters without the help of a doctor, and she held down the family homestead alone for weeks at a time when her husband was out hunting, surveying, or working in logging camps to support their pioneer brood.
My grandmother and grandfather had a very gentle, loving relationship, always kind to one another. It was a romantic story. How else could any man get a woman to live in the wilderness for 50 years and raise him 4 big, strong daughters?
Dora Hulsdonk left the Hoe only twice during the half-century she lived here. She and her husband were too busy carving a livelihood out of the wilderness and teaching their daughters the skills of self-sufficiency.
I would describe my mother's and her sisters as being very capable women. We never grew up, any of us, with the idea there wasn't anything we couldn't do. Well, they knew how to hunt. They knew how to, of course, shoot with hunting. They knew how to fish. They knew how to track. They knew how to trap. They knew how to do things that nowadays women don't have the foggiest idea how to do. I'm Eric.
Marilyn Lewis still lives in the Hoe rainforest, working a farm that is part of the original family homestead. Her life is not so different from the way her grandparents lived, and that's just the way she likes it.
The animals, the weather, the decor around me, the changing scenes of spring, summer, fall, winter. It's just a cleaner life and a healthier life and a more open life, I think. You have more to do with nature than you. It's just different.
You're getting all the corn. Yeah, you are.
The Hoh Valley, so beloved by the Iron Man and women of the Hulsdonk family, lies in the shadow of Mount Olympus, the crown jewel of the peninsula. At nearly 8,000 feet, it is the highest peak in the park. The massive mountain shoulders 7 active glaciers, some of which may be as long as 3 miles, and in some places, 900 feet thick. Northeast of Mount Olympus is Hurricane Ridge, named for the 60-mile-an-hour winds that blast across it in the winter. The ridge offers one of the more breathtaking views of the park and also affords glimpses of Olympic's extraordinary wildlife. Though blue grouse are found at all elevations in the park, they are most commonly seen on Hurricane Ridge. In other parts of the American West, including Mount Rainier, black bears may sport either black or brown coats. But in Olympic, all bears are black. They feed on grasses, nuts, berries, insects, and fish. When smaller animals forage for food, they must also be wary of large animals hunting for their own dinner. The Olympic marmot has developed an interesting way to deal with this threat. One of the marmots climbs on the highest ground in the area and acts as a sentinel for the rest of the small colony. At the first sign of potential danger, the sentinel whistles and all of the marmots dash for their burrows. Despite the unique natural diversity of the Olympic area, Washington State's powerful logging and mining industries fiercely resisted the idea of establishing a national park on the peninsula. But in the fall of 1937, during a visit to the area, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was impressed with the importance of preserving this wilderness treasure. At his urging on June 16, 1938, Congress changed Olympic status from National Monument to National Park. Among the many attractions that impressed President Roosevelt was Lake Crescent. Lying at the base of Storm King Mountain, among the giant fir and hemlock trees near the northern edge of the park, this gem of the Olympics has been both a popular resort and an idyllic retreat since the 1890s. The trails around the lake reveal a fragile, pastoral beauty. Nearby at Rainier Falls, a 90-foot cascade mesmerizes passers-by. West of Lake Crescent is Solduck Falls, a scene out of a fairy tale kingdom. Each season of the year brings different colors and textures to the delicate landscape. Because of the dense vegetation and jagged mountains, many of Olympic's treasures, such as Solduck Falls, remained undiscovered by European explorers for centuries. In 1788, Captain John Meares of the Royal British Navy sailed along the coast and glimpsed the crown of these massive mountains. In his ship's log, he recorded,
"If that be not the home where dwell the gods, it is beautiful enough to be, and I therefore call it Mount Olympus."
Because of the isolation of the Olympic range, superstitions arose and the mountains were thought to be haunted. madmen were said to live up there. In 1889, a newspaper, the Seattle Press, sponsored an expedition to explore the Olympic Mountains. For 6 months, during one of the most severe winters on record, the brave members of the press expedition completed the first well-documented north-south crossing of the mountains. Today, that same trip takes only 4 or 5 days. As if a verdant rainforest and a bold mountain range weren't enough natural bounty for one peninsula, the river valleys of the Olympic National Park also lead to one of the most dramatic stretches of wilderness coast on the continent. The wild, raw beauty of the Olympic seashore camouflages delicately balanced ecosystems, complex, fragile, and precious. At first glance, Rialto Beach is a stark, almost primordial landscape. Giant uprooted trees, bleached by the sun, stripped and polished smooth by the sea, lie like ancient skeletons in a timeless graveyard. Fierce winds can whip the waves into destructive walls of water. The relentless onslaught of the sea hammers out a striking tableau. Massive rocks rise from the water like ravaged fortresses. These sea stacks were once part of the landmass, but as waves chiseled away the softer stone, only the harder, more resistant cores remained. The gravitational pull of the moon and the daily rotation of the Earth combine to produce tides of extraordinary intensity. Often, tide pool inhabitants must endure continuous cycles of hot sun and pounding surf, followed by submersion in cold salt water. This relentless cycle would seem to be enough to discourage potential seashore dwellers. But in fact, this strip of sand and rock is actually teeming with intriguing and exotic creatures. Carrie Jones is a park ranger who guides groups on walks along the shore to explore the subtle and often overlooked wonders of this remarkable environment.
This is a wonderful rock here. It's completely covered with life. It's a wonderful example of how life crowds into the intertidal area. They're all competing for resources here, food, and just a place to live. So here we have the sea stars. The orange ones and purple ones and reddish ones are all the same species, the ochre sea star, Pysester ocraceus. Nobody really knows why they're different colors. It's just like people have different hair. It seems to be no particular advantage or disadvantage to being one color over the other. We have one here you can feel. I'll pass it around in a minute. It's got its skeleton on the outside. It's hard. It has its tube feet. You can see these little feet. They move slowly around. They're searching for something to grip onto now that it's been taken off of its home. It has a mouth in the center underneath. Now here's the question of the day. We look at the rocks, and you see that they're all covered with bits and pieces of plant matter and barnacles, all sorts of encrusting things. And the sea star moves very slowly. How can it keep itself so clean? It has on its back small pinching devices. And when a larval barnacle tries to settle on its back, these little pedicellaria, stalk pinchers come out and they grip and clean its back. This lightly grips her hair with these little pinchers, trying to clean its back.
Although certainly well-groomed, a sea star has indiscriminate dining habits and will eat almost anything within reach of its stomach. The sea star can wrap its powerful suction legs around the shell of a mussel, pry it open, then push its own stomach into the victim's shell and digest it on the spot. Acorn and gooseneck barnacles, standing on their heads inside their tough shells, open tiny hatches and stretch out feathery legs to sweep in any food particles that may be floating by. Mussels living in colonies open their shells to pump seawater through their bodies and filter out small organisms from the water. Like a tiny dredge, the keyhole limpet siphons water and food particles through its tiny gill system, discharging the water through the distinctive hole at the top of its shell.
So we have a purple sea urchin. There's purple urchins, red urchins, and green urchins on the Pacific coast. And it protects itself with these spines, and these guys are vegetarians. They eat kelp, algae that drift in. But between each of the rows of spines, it has pinching devices like the sea star does. The sea stars and the urchins are related. If the sea stars have 5 arms, and if we could get a real close view of the mouth of the urchin, you'd see that it has 5 plates to it. Between the rows of spines, it has both the pinchers and little tube feet. You can see that its spines will be moving. If it's underwater and it senses danger from one direction, it'll put all of its spines in that direction. And it'll try. It's holding on to my fingers now with its little tube feet. You see them? Oh, there, just let go.
As the tide goes out and the dense and colorful variety of intertidal species is exposed, various predators arrive to feed. The shorebirds of the Olympic coast have adapted remarkably well to an amphibious existence. While most birds could not survive if forced to drink only seawater, coastal birds are equipped with salt glands that remove salt from both the water and the food they ingest. Some, such as the oyster catcher, have a beak shaped like a double-edged knife for opening shells. The cormorant and the pelican fold their wings against their body when they dive in search of food. Both birds are powerful swimmers with excellent underwater vision. The waters of the Olympic shore also teem with marine mammals. Although these harbor seals are year-round residents, there are also temporary visitors, including sea lions, dolphins, and whales. Survival in the intertidal community is an art form, and each creature has developed its own expertise, its own special link in the tapestry of this complex environment. The Native American tribes of the Olympic Peninsula have lived in harmony with nature for thousands of years. When European explorers arrived in this region in the 18th century, 9 tribes lived in villages along the coastal lowlands. The northwestern tip of the Olympic Peninsula is the home of the Makah Indians. The survival of their 2,000-year-old culture is an affirmation of their strong tribal identity and deep respect for traditional values. Hamilton Green is a Makah tribal leader.
I think when the European people came into their country, they brought with them a custom that we were not used to, and we couldn't understand exactly what they wanted from us, and they kept us from trying to keep our culture alive. We couldn't even speak our own language hardly. If we maintain the knowledge of our language and our culture and songs and dances, it identifies us as Indian people of who we are and where we are from originally. We have in our culture a salmon bake, which we roast by the fire on cedar sticks, and it's tied up in a manner that it will not fall off the stick, and it's fresh fish that we use, and it's baked for an hour on each side. And when you eat that kind of a fish, you know that you can't help but be happy. Dancing means a lot to an Indian person because it is part of their training, it is part of their upbringing, and having your own family song and dances, you are identified to that group of people that owned that song. They owned their own songs and dances. These songs and dances were created by the ancestors a long time ago when they would be training for being a whale hunter or a seal hunter or a fisherman. They would have to go up in the mountains to pray and fast, and they would be there for days maybe, and then maybe when they returned with that power to be a whale hunter, they would have a song to go with it and a dance, and that would be their identity for life. So that's how we got our songs and dances, and that's why we're proud of our culture.
From ancient native cultures to enduring wonders, Mount Rainier and Olympic offer a remarkably diverse wilderness experience. The Pacific Northwest is a land of startling contrasts and rich variety. Towering mountains, lush rainforests, and windswept beaches. A majestic, snow-covered mountain that holds within its belly awesome powers of creation and destruction. There are landscapes here to challenge the body and soothe the soul. From the jagged magnificence of the lofty peaks to the exquisite serenity of paradise, Mount Rainier and Olympic, timeless treasures of the Pacific Northwest.
Our journey to Alaska begins in the city of Vancouver. Located on the western coast of British Columbia, Vancouver is our point of embarkation. As the sun rises over the mountains of British Columbia, the Island Princess makes her way quietly through Vancouver Harbor. Each summer, thousands of travelers journey to Alaska through the fabled Inside Passage on board luxurious ships such as the Island Princess. Our captain, Christopher Sample, and the deputy captain, Roger Knight, position themselves on the bridge wings as the Island Princess approaches her berth at the Vancouver Pier. Our ship is ending a one-week cruise from Whittier, Alaska. As soon as the lines are tied, 600 passengers will disembark, painters will touch up the hull, new stores will be brought on board, the ship will bunker 1,500 tons of fuel, and a staff of 300 will prepare the ship for another departure the very same day. In the afternoon, we will board along with 600 other passengers on one of the most popular cruises of all time, a journey through Alaska's Inside Passage, then north to the top of the world. There is a sense of excitement here that only a great ship can provide. The luxury, relaxation, and wonder of a grand style of travel that speaks of another age. Well-wishers on the pier extend an excited bon voyage as the lines are thrown and the Island Princess begins another journey north to the 49th state. Our ship sails through the Vancouver Harbor toward the open sea. As we pass under the Stanley Bridge, deckhands bring in the port flags, and another sailing is underway. The Island Princess is one of more than a dozen great ships that make this journey each week in the summer months. She sails out of Vancouver and then heads north along the Canadian coast. Our first stop is the lively town of Ketchikan, the first community of any size that we will encounter in Alaska. The Inside Passage is a natural, protected waterway created by nature. An archipelago of more than 1,000 islands forms a calm, protected passage north along the Alaskan coast. Ketchikan is a busy port, and its harbor fronts the main street of the town. The wood frame houses cling to the hillside above this community, which is still an active center for the fishing trade. Each morning, fishing boats head through the early misty fog to catch the Alaskan king salmon that are Ketchikan's main claim to fame. We dock in the center of a town that has the dubious distinction of being one of the wettest cities in the world. In the center of Ketchikan is a rain gauge that registers almost with a sense of local pride just how much rain the community has endured to date. Here in southeast Alaska, the weatherman has a pretty simple job. If he predicts rain, he stands a good chance of being right. Ketchikan sits in the midst of one of the most beautiful parts of the Inside Passage on a green velvet island. The community developed as a logging center. The timber industry is still active today. Logs are floated down the passage to the sawmill on the outskirts of town. With a population of only 11,000, Ketchikan is still the fourth largest city in the state. At the turn of the century, it was considered a boomtown with 800 settlers, but its history actually goes back thousands of years to the native Tlingit Indians, the original settlers of this land. A young Alaskan of Tlingit bloodlines chops out the center of a rough-hewn log as he prepares to carve a corner post for a ceremonial hall. The Tlingit Indians of southeast Alaska continue their traditions today, and the beautifully hand-carved totems stand as a reminder of a rich and colorful past. The figures on these elaborately carved totem poles represent events, leaders, family, and the history of each clan. They do not, in most cases, represent gods or spirituality, as some people assume. They were created to preserve the stories and history of a people, not as idols of worship. Because Ketchikan is on an island, roads are rare. This is the land of the small private plane. Float planes take off and land on runways of water, providing accessibility to a vast and pristine land. Misty Fjords National Monument lies to the east of Ketchikan. It is a wonderland of 2 million protected acres and a paradise for sportsmen and tourists alike. It is accessible only by air. Temsco Aviation of Ketchikan is going to take us into this wilderness region. After circling the mountains, our pilot lands our plane in the middle of a quiet lake. Each day, Temsco flies in fishermen early in the day and returns before sunset to take them out again. The experience is typically Alaskan, quiet, beautiful, and one of many shore excursions available to passengers from ships sailing the Inside Passage. With the gear, the passengers, and the catch aboard, the plane takes off out over the lake, soaring into the sky above the misty fjords of this beautiful land. Back in Ketchikan, we reboard the Island Princess and continue sailing north through the Inside Passage. Piloting this ship through this inland waterway of islands and reefs is a delicate task. Captain Sample watches from the bridge as the Island Princess navigates a particularly complex course. Deputy Captain Knight mans the controls of this 553-foot vessel while monitoring a panel of instruments designed to ensure our safe passage. The wheel itself is maneuvered by a senior crew member who takes direct orders from Captain Sample as he directs the ship port and starboard through the narrow channel. The job of our navigator, Graham Goodway, is very complex in this part of the world. Unlike Mexico, the Mediterranean, and much of the Caribbean, where a ship can steam for hours on one course heading, these waters are far more complex, filled with hidden reefs, rising and falling tides, swift currents, and other navigational hazards that require complex and precise navigation. P&O Lines has maintained one of the best safety records of any shipping line afloat. Tied in with safety is the radio room. It is the chief radio officer's duty to make sure the ship is in constant contact with other vessels nearby and to monitor the ship's exact position. When he isn't busy doing priority ship business, he'll put your personal phone call through. Passengers can call anywhere in the world through the satellite link. All of this and more is a part of the behind-the-scenes world of a luxury liner, whether sailing the high seas or the protected waters of the Alaskan coast. The weather is very changeable in the Inside Passage. While often gray, misty, and wet, it can also be beautifully clear. Warm summer days with bright sunshine reflecting off the calm, peaceful waters are common on part of any cruise north. Our next stop is the capital of Alaska, Juneau, a landlocked city accessible only by sea or by air. Juneau has been the capital of Alaska since 1906. By the time our ship has steamed north into the Gastineau Channel leading to Juneau, the weather has changed. It is gray, misty, foggy ahead. Juneau is perched on a shelf between massive mountains to the east and a deep water channel to the west. Today, the town will host thousands of cruise passengers as 4 different ships tie up or anchor off this remote spot. The Island Princess crew works quickly to make the lines fast. Huge power winches pull the massive hemp lines in the delicate operation required to dock the ship. And today we're greeted by Juneau's mascot, the Alaskan smiling bear, ready to pose for a photo and then send you on your way. The main street of Juneau is a reminder of Alaska's mining days. From the turn of the century until 1944, 3 different mining companies took $158 million in gold from the creeks and valleys around the town. Today, the local economy is split between federal and state payrolls, some fishing, and the cruise ship trade. And the local delicacy is not some exotic creature of the wild, but fudge. The Alaskan Fudge Company on Franklin Street does a booming business when the cruise ships are in. Here, the fudge is made the old-fashioned way, cooked and simmered, then spread out on marble slabs and turned with a huge spatula until it has cooled and set, ready for you to eat. Juneau was built on hills, and the town seems to go straight up. Old wooden homes speak of a time when this was a boom town built on the prosperity of gold. Wooden stairways cover the hills and still provide the primary access down into the center of town. This is a city that will give you a workout. There is no need for an aerobics class here. A simple walk home will do. Juneau is the state capital, and the simplicity of the Capitol building reflects the fact that when it was built, Alaska was a territory, not a state. The governor's mansion is just around the corner. It is elegant and grand, particularly for Alaska. But this is no ordinary state capital. Not only are there no roads in or out, a huge glacier abuts the backside of town. The Mendenhall Glacier is a massive moving wall of ice 12 miles long, extending out of the 1,500-mile-long Juneau ice field. Anyone who comes to Alaska wonders why the glacial ice is blue. The reason is the density of the ice. The ice is so compact, so solid, that it refracts the light, separating and reflecting back the blue, while absorbing all other color wavelengths. The intensity of the blue varies according to the density of the ice. For many cruise passengers, one of Juneau's greatest thrills starts here at Era Helicopters. Each summer, Era transports thousands of visitors high into the Juneau ice field. For many, it is their first helicopter ride. For almost all, it will be their first walk on a glacier. This is one of the great travel experiences of North America. Moments after takeoff, we are soaring out over one of the largest ice fields on Earth as we enter a land of eternal snow. Our pilot searches for a flat spot away from the deep and dangerous crevasses. We land in an icy rain and set foot onto the glacier, a world far removed from the ship we left behind. Glacial melt pours deep into the dangerous icy tunnels, reflecting a rich indigo blue. As the storm intensifies on the glacier, our pilot loads up and takes off, leaving this desolate, frozen land of wonder far below. From Juneau, we steam north to one of Alaska's most amazing attractions, Glacier Bay. This protected bay gives us the chance to see some of the world's greatest tidewater glaciers. This day is one of the highlights of any Alaska cruise. A National Parks ranger boards the ship from a tender and stays with us throughout the day. He answers questions from passengers and offers a running commentary as the ship passes through this amazing waterway. Just 2 centuries ago, this was a solid mass of ice left behind by the Ice Age. A gradual warming trend and the action of earthquakes forced the ice to recede, and the ocean moved in to fill the void. Today, Glacier Bay is 60 miles long. Its shores are lined with 16 major and dozens of minor tidewater glaciers that are all still slowly retreating onto the land. The Indians called it Thunder Bay because of the roaring sound that would echo out after the glaciers would calve massive icebergs into the bay. The captain carefully navigates the Island Princess closer and closer to the Marjorie Glacier. His eyes never leave the glacier's face, for if a large enough iceberg breaks off, he'll have to make a quick retreat. Dwarfed by the size of this mass of ice, the Island Princess journeys right up to the glacier face. Passengers scan the snow-covered wall and listen for the creaking sounds, then point and watch as the glaciers calve into the sea. From Glacier Bay, we head east, then north through the Lynn Canal, a natural channel carved by ice long ago. The Lynn Canal brings us to our next port of call, the scrappy mining community of Skagway, almost unchanged since the gold rush days of 1898. The Island Princess docks downtown at the very end of the Lynn Canal, and we disembark to explore this true frontier town. For about a year and a half, Skagway was one of the busiest towns in the world. This quaint community, complete with false front stores and wooden sidewalks, remains much as it was during the days of the Great Alaskan Gold Rush. In July of 1897, a group of miners, fresh from Dawson City, arrived in San Francisco with 3 tons of gold. News of the discovery electrified the nation, and within weeks, an estimated 100,000 men from San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle boarded ships sailing north. Lawlessness was rampant. There was no attempted order. Prostitution flourished, and the cribs, little wooden huts, individual bordellos, still stand on the old main street. At the turn of the century, they offered services that were strictly illegal but widely used. A modern-day sign over one such crib aptly describes the services offered inside. Gambling flourished, liquor abounded, and the whole rollicking town had a frontier feeling that had long since vanished in the lower 48. On the outskirts of town, the cemetery speaks of shootouts and tragic deaths. Few people here lived long lives. The stakes were high, and the town attracted the misfits of America, seeking their fortunes in the hills that promised gold. This was the town of gold, and also the town of steam. The White Pass and Yukon Railroad still operates under the power of steam. The train pulls up next to the Island Princess. So let's board the train and set out on a true journey back in time. story of this railroad is, of course, the story of gold. Thousands of prospectors had used the Chilkoot Trail and the White Pass Trail to the Klondike fields. The route was torturous, and hundreds of men and thousands of animals died trying to get through the pass in the winter of 1898. A Canadian group set to work to capitalize on the stampede by building one of the most impossible railroads imaginable. 1,000 men went to work in May of 1898 under the direction of a colorful character named Mike Henney. And 14 months later, after enduring sheer hell, the track was laid and the trains began to roll. But almost simultaneously, the gold rush ended, and the miners seeking passage through the pass disappeared. For 7 decades, the railroad struggled along hauling freight. It finally closed down and sat idle for 5 years. Then in 1988, with the second Skagway boom, the cruise ship trade, the railroad was refurbished, the old cars polished up, and the line put back into service to haul visitors to the summit so travelers could relive some of the magic of the Gold Rush days. From the train, we now return to the ship. The Island Princess is preparing to sail south and west toward the open sea. We are leaving the protected waters of the Inside Passage and heading toward the Gulf of Alaska. The serenity of this waterway gives way to the rolling seas as we sail alongside spectacular snow-covered mountains that rise up from the shore. In the night, the waves build as the Island Princess heads west across the Gulf. But the following morning, all is peaceful and calm. The seas are glassy, and crew members open up the ship. During the night, the seas necessitated battening down the bow area by installing heavy metal covers over the large open windows. This morning, these will be removed and stored until needed again. The Island Princess carries 600 passengers and a crew of 300. The staff is comprised of many nationalities: British, Italian, Filipino, Portuguese, and American. Maintaining a great ocean liner requires many different skills. Engine workers, safety engineers, manifest officers, provisioning agents are all a part of the onboard team that keeps a great liner afloat. A ship is really a floating hotel, requiring the same personnel that you would find in a fine resort. Shore excursions are a part of any cruise. Dennis Daughters is the shore excursion manager and will oversee dozens of different excursions for the passengers. The photo shop is a part of any ship at sea. Onboard photographers take hundreds of photographs of passengers both on and off the ship. Within a few hours, the photographs are on display. Ships also offer shopping on board. International law allows duty-free shopping while the ship is at sea, and ships offer an interesting array of merchandise. The Island Princess offers a wide variety of cabins. The cabin that you see here is a typical medium-grade cabin designed for efficient use by travelers at sea. A daily newspaper, the Satellite World News, will keep you in touch with current events. But some of the real magic of any cruise happens in the galleys below. Executive Chef Pietro Rolfo is a veteran of great ships and is a master of preparing lavish meals. The Island Princess prides itself on fine continental cuisine. The staff is from Italy, and their talented skills make for fine dining. Everything must be prepared on board. Fresh bread is baked daily, and pastry workers prepare desserts that would delight a king. Of all of the dishes and meals prepared at sea, nothing rivals the desserts. Here in the pastry kitchen, chefs can produce anything your heart desires. Cakes, pies, torts, puffs, and creams come out of the ovens each day. Personally inscribed cakes are prepared for passengers celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. One of the real treats of our week at sea comes on our 5th day out, when the galley staff sets up the gala deck buffet. Today, as we sail across the Gulf of Alaska, lunch is served on the open decks under clear blue skies. The main courses and side dishes are really only an excuse, a momentary diversion, for the real reason for showing up here, the dessert buffet. A spectacle worthy of a dieter's worst nightmare is a table laid out with the most incredible array of calorie-laden joy anyone could possibly imagine. There is so much activity and milling around, you can discreetly make a half a dozen passes through. No one will notice except the staff who, like diet saboteurs, eagerly encourage you to do just that. In the evening, Captain Sample will greet passengers, introduce the senior officers, and brief us on our journey through the waters of College Fjord tomorrow. And after the captain's cocktail party, passengers begin their night at sea. The dining room opens for dinner after dark, and elegantly attired passengers enjoy wonderfully leisurely dinners at sea. After dinner, passengers can participate in a wide variety of activities. Some will head to the casino to try their luck. The ship offers roulette, blackjack, dice, and slot machines. And if you have the common sense not to lose too much, or the brilliance to quit while you're ahead, it can be fun and a part of the entertainment at sea. The following morning is our 6th day out. The Island Princess is completing her journey across the Gulf of Alaska, and will soon begin one of the most interesting experiences offered by the Alaska cruise, sailing through College Fjord. Tucked into the south-central coast of Alaska, College Fjord is a part of Prince William Sound, an ecologically sensitive area brought to public attention by the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Today, nature has healed most of those wounds, and few signs of those fateful days remain. The public furor that the spill aroused becomes more understandable as you sail up this sound. This is one of the most spectacular pageants of glacial ice anywhere on Earth. Dozens of glaciers tumble down into the sea. Each is named for a famous institution of higher learning, thus the name College Fjord. The size and scope of this land is almost beyond comprehension. Ice millions of years old, retreating, advancing, slowly shaping and reforming the face of the Earth. Our ship sails up to the very face of Harvard Glacier. We lie off of the ice, waiting quietly for nature to perform. We listen for the sound of the creaking ice, then glance to the left and right quickly, so that our eyes can catch the sight of the ice calving into the sea. The Great Alaska Cruise is one of the world's most memorable travel experiences, enjoyed each year by thousands of people who sail north on great ships like the Island Princess to Alaska, America's Northern Star.